Hi, I'm Sue Prendinger. I'm one of the forensic interviewers at the Colorado Springs Police Department, and my partner, Detective Corey Dabb from the Colorado Springs Police Department Crimes Against Children Unit, and I are going to be talking to you today about your response in a scene as a first responder if you go out and you have concerns that a child is being abused or neglected. What do you do if that happens? You've learned about the definitions of child abuse. You've learned about red flags to look for. Now you're in that situation. What are you as a first responder going to do? If you have a concern, look and see if there are children present. Are there children present that you can talk to, that you can gather information from? You're the first person out on this scene. You are going to be able to gather information to determine the health, safety, and welfare of the children that are present. We're going to give you some guidelines and some help in talking to kids when you go out on a scene. See if there are children present. First and foremost, are there children there? How old are the kids that are there? Can they talk? Do they have language? Are these children that can help you understand more of the dynamics of the scene that you have just walked in upon? As a first responder, you are walking into the cleanest scene for the child to talk with you because the child hasn't been influenced by what they've heard or seen somebody else talking about. So check and see if there are children present. If there are, do they have language? Can you understand what the children are saying? Are you going to be able to talk to them and gather information from the kids that are present? Now, of course, if children are, infants between 0 and 3 years old, they're not going to be verbal enough for you to interview them, but they certainly can say spontaneous statements. Document those statements in your report. Child may say, Daddy hurt Mommy. Mommy has blood on her face. My sissy hit my brother. Document that. If there are children over the age of 3 present, you can probably glean information from them. Kids love to talk. Kids love to tell you about themselves. They have a lot of information that they can provide for you. We're going to show you a video clip in just a few minutes about an officer putting themselves down on the child's level, talking to the child away from a caregiver so they're not influenced by other people or adults at the scene. If you're wearing equipment, explain to the child what that's about. They may be very curious about what you're wearing and what you do. Make sure you use simple and concrete language in talking to a child. And here's an example of a first responder presenting in a neutral, non-threatening demeanor, talking to a child.
Hey, how you doing? Hello, what's your name?
Dylan.
Hi, Dylan. My name is Brian. I'm here to help you out today. Oh, I'm just here to check on you. That's my badge. I work for the fire department. So are you here by yourself?
Yes.
Who do you normally live with here?
My mom.
Oh, your mom. How old are you, Dylan?
8.
You're 8. Okay. How often do you stay home by yourself?
A few times a week.
A few times a week. And do you know where your mom went to?
To get some groceries.
She went to get some groceries. Wow. So what do you do if there's an emergency?
Call 911.
Well, that's a good idea. Well, Dylan, I'm going to hang out with you for a little while here, and we're going to try and figure out where your mom is, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Good thing to remember, too, when you're talking to young children, kids can be very concrete and literal. I have a frog in my throat. This is an example of that literal. This is what I call our cheat sheet. Hang on to this information, which gives you basically at what age a child can answer these questions. Who, what, where, and when are the questions you want to be talking, the language you want to be using with children to elicit information, as opposed to asking direct, leading questions. You want to ask non-leading questions that elicit information from the child. A 3-year-old child cannot tell you when or where something happened, but a 12-year-old will be able to respond very similarly to an adult. Hang on to this chart. Here's some real good, just example questions to use those, what I call W words, who, what, when, where. Ask a child who lives here, who watches you, who lives around the neighborhood, who cooks your meals for you. Good open-ended questions eliciting information from the child. What is a great open-ended question? What happened? You start talking to a child about what did you see, what did you hear, and they'll tell you something, and then maybe follow up with, then what happened? Tell me what happened. Tell me everything you remember about that. Eliciting information from the child with open-ended questions. Where? Where were you when something happened? Where do you hurt? A good question to ask also is, where do you go to school? Where do you go to daycare? Some of the follow-up investigations are not going to be conducted in the child's home, but actually in school or daycare. So where is very important, and law enforcement is always interested in where because of jurisdictional reasons. How is probably the best open-ended question to ask a child, and here are some good examples of how, eliciting information from the child. Here's some questions to avoid. You do not want the child just answering yes or no to information you provide. You want to elicit, with our open-ended questions, a narrative from the child. So avoid questions that start with did or elicit a yes or no response. Try not to ask more than one question at a time. We kind of call that question crowding. It gets confusing for adults and children if you ask too many things in one question. So keep it simple. Avoid asking why something happened. I asked a boy the other day about why his sister did something, and he looked at me and said, I don't know, why don't you ask her? Which was a very good response from him. I should ask the sister, not him. Why is a good question to avoid? When and how many times? Refer to that chart again. Number of times a child may tell you it happened a gazillion times. Not a good answer, and that is on the question asker. So avoid these. I'm going to show you a video here of some of how not to respond to children on the scene. Thanks for your time.
Hi there. What's your name?
Dylan.
Okay, you need to talk louder, okay, because I can't hear you.
Dylan.
Okay, well, you don't need to yell at me. I'm just here trying to help you, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Well, someone called us and said that you were abandoned by your caregiver. Were you?
What?
Did your mom leave you alone?
Yes.
Why did she leave you alone? Was there a reason for it?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, can you give me an exact time when you anticipate her returning to the residence?
I don't know what you mean.
Okay, well, how am I supposed to help you when you can't answer my questions, little man?
Try being nicer to me.
Hello, I'm Detective Corey Dabb with the Colorado Springs Police Department Crimes Against Children Unit. Today we're going to be talking about reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect. Some of the topics we're discussing are questions to ask caregivers, gathering of minimal facts, some risk factors to consider in determining reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, and also some key concepts in determining reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, and finally reporting requirements. First of all, I want to let you know that a caregiver can be anybody that's in charge of a child's well-being at any particular time. It doesn't have to be a parent necessarily. It could be a teacher, it could be a daycare employee, worker, it could be a sibling. But again, whoever's in charge of that child at any particular time. Some of the questions you're going to want to ask the caregiver are to have them tell you about their child. Ask how their child got hurt. Ask where they were when the injury happened. So you want to consider if the answers that you receive from the caregiver are consistent with that of a prudent parent. You're looking for any indications that the caregiver shows or says about the victim. For instance, are they unemotional about the victim while at the same time they're treating other kids on scene differently? So with gathering minimal facts, the goal of your initial response to the call for service is to gather just enough basic understanding of what has happened. This is not a time for a full investigation or a full interview. You're going to want to determine the reasonable suspicion for abuse or neglect. You're going to want to obtain suspect information, and also it's important to obtain the suspect's accessibility to other children in the home. For instance, they may run a in-home daycare, which at the time you're at the call for service, you may only have the caregiver's child there, but later on you're going to have other kids coming into the home. Again, listening to the caregiver, you want to determine some inconsistencies between the scene, injury, and statements. Lastly, you want to assess the parent's protective capacity, because if you're not able to establish the reasonable suspicion for abuse or neglect, you're going to be leaving the home, the child's going to be staying there. You still want to make sure that that parent is going to be taking care of the child. Some risk factors to consider are, before responding to a call, you want to check to see if there's a large number of calls for service at the address. In these calls, is there a lot of domestic violence or disturbance type calls where the child is going to be witnessing numerous arguments in the home, as well as possibly, potentially being subjected to some verbal abuse, him or herself. You want to see if there's any previous reports of child abuse or neglect at the address, because that might add up into the reasonable suspicion as well. And another resource to consider, either prior to arriving or after your arrival, is by contacting DHS. DHS might be able to provide some additional information on the family that your local databases might not have. So again, they're a good resource. And based on the information that you gather, you want to determine if your call for service is an isolated incident or if it's one in a pattern of behavior. Regarding some of the children's behavior, you want to make sure that's age appropriate. For instance, you might have a child who's parentified, where they're really young but they're acting in more of a parental role, maybe even answering questions that you're asking to the parents. You want to see if the scene is safe and make sure that the children are being nurtured in it. It's not one that is, hazardous or harmful to the child. Lastly, if you have a number of things adding up at this point, it's not just matching up with the story you're being told. You might be at the point of reasonable suspicion for abuse or neglect. Next, we'll talk about some key concepts. As mentioned earlier, you want to listen to the child's language, vocabulary, and grammar, and respond to them in a likewise manner so they understand you. Children over 3 years old, you're able to talk to them. However, children under 3, you're going to document whatever statements that they make. Talking with the caregiver, you want to see if, again, their story is consistent with the scene, the injury, and what other witnesses are telling you. And if you're starting to get information that just isn't adding up, use your training, experience, and common sense and realize that you might be at reasonable suspicion. You may not have probable cause to make an arrest in this type of a case, but you might have the reasonable suspicion. If you have that, the next step, as mentioned previously in other segments, all first responders are mandatory reporters as the statute states. This training is just another important reminder of why it is important to report. It's also very important to remember that in these types of situations, DHS will report its information to law enforcement. However, all first responders, whether you're a police officer, emergency medical services, or fire department personnel, you must report your information to DHS. It is not just good enough to take and document it on a department form. Ways to report are by contacting the El Paso County Department of Human Services at 444-5700, or you can report via email at dhschildabusreport@elpasoco.com, or you can check your local listings for your law enforcement agencies, or also search them online. In closing, I'd like to thank you for your time and all the hard work you do as a first responder. Please remember that you, as a first responder, might be the only person to come in contact with a child in their home outside of their immediate family. So therefore, you, as a first responder, are the eyes and ears for that child, and you can help get the necessary programs or services to the most vulnerable members of our community. Thank you.